All this equipment here, it's trying to jump through hoops sometimes. Anyway, we're in a Bible class. This is lesson 34 of our survey. We're still in section 8. This is part 7 of it. Last week, I don't think I wrote down what we discussed, but I guess I did. We were just about to get into Ahab and Naboth, I reckon, in 1 Kings chapter 21. This is a story that most of us are familiar with. It's an excellent story of divine providence, what God can do. To us, it looks like mere coincidence, but God can arrange things to happen exactly as He wants it to happen. In this case, it appears He guided an arrow to its intended destination, and I'll show you that as we proceed. Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel beside the palace of Ahab, the king of Samaria. And Naboth said to Ahab, I'm sorry, I left out a part there. Anyway, Ahab wanted to buy this vineyard. It joins his land. He wants to expand his land. He wants to build a garden there so it'll look pretty from his house. And Naboth responded to the king, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. You remember, when they entered into the land of Canaan, the land was divided up. And it was passed down the line in succession according to the original inheritance that people received as God divided up the land through Joshua. Well, this is what he's talking about. God forbid that I should surrender the land that Jehovah left my fathers and sell it to you. Well, Ahab went into his house. He was vexed. He was upset. It shows you what a little baby he was. He was sullen because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him, for he said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. Now watch this guy. He went and he lay down in his bed. He turned his face, facing the wall, looking away from everybody, and he would eat no food. Now, does that look like a little kid or what? Go to bed and stomp their little feet? Yeah, this guy's the king. And this is the way he acts when he doesn't get what he wants. He goes to bed without his supper, and he turns his face against the wall, and he pouts like a big baby. This is Ahab. That's what the guy was like. His wife, she wasn't like that at all. Man, she was tough as nails. Jezebel's wife, she came to Ahab. She said to him, why is your spirit so sullen that you eat no food? And Ahab went through one. Ahab, Naboth won't give me that vineyard, and I wanted that vineyard to build me a garden. And his wife, she gets a little upset with him. Jezebel said to him, you now exercise authority over Israel. You're the king. What are you acting like this for? Arise, eat food, let your heart be cheerful. I'll give you the vineyard of Naboth. When he refused to give the land, she would have just killed him and taken it. That's the kind of a person she was. But her husband, he doesn't. He doesn't want to just kill him. He goes to bed and he pouts. And his wife, who's actually the man in the house, she says, don't worry about it. I'll take care of business. You'll have that little land you want. Well, Naboth ultimately was stoned to death. There was a conspiracy. A couple of people told a lie. And he was stoned to death because they said he blasphemed the king. And then Ahab took possession of the vineyard. They murdered him to get what Ahab wanted. Well, God was watching. One man, Naboth, just one man. You never hear of him in the Bible. He didn't do anything significant that we're aware of. He's just a guy. A good guy probably, but he's just a guy. And God seen that guy, that lone guy, that insignificant guy. God watched what happened to him. Ahab and Elijah now. Elijah gets involved. God's going to send him on a mission. The word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite saying, arise, go down to meet Ahab, the king of Israel, who lives in Samaria. There he is. He's in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone down to take possession of it. Now, Elijah is a long ways from where Ahab is, but God's telling him now that when you get there, he'll be there in that vineyard. There he is. Not at this moment. When you arrive there, there he is in the vineyard of Naboth. You shall speak to him, saying, Thus says the Lord, in the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, dogs shall lick your blood, Ahab, even yours. God witnessed the mistreatment of his son, and God is going to take vengeance on those who were responsible for it. You remember what the Bible teaches. God said, vengeance belongs to me. Don't seek out vengeance yourself. You go ahead and do the things you're supposed to do. I'll take care of that. And this is what's happening. God is taking vengeance on the people who are responsible for the death of his son. But the Lord continues, I will make your house, Ahab, like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. He's going to extinguish it. And like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah. Poof, it's going to be gone. Because of the provocation with which you have provoked me to anger and made Israel sin. The Lord is upset with Ahab, just like he was upset with Jeroboam, and just like he was upset with Baasha. And because he was upset to this point, he was going to end the lineage of Ahab. Concerning Jezebel, the Lord also spoke, saying, The dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Of course, this is a prophecy, just like Ahab's is. By the wall of Jezreel, dogs will eat your flesh. You ever notice that when God punishes these people, they usually wind up being eaten by dogs or birds? They don't get to be buried in the ground. Animals wind up consuming them. And that's what's going to happen with the king and his wicked wife, Jezebel. Of course, Jezebel is a name that's notoriously associated with evil in the Bible. In the book of Revelation, Rome, Imperial Rome at least, is referred to as Jezebel because it had the same characteristics that the original Jezebel did. The dog shall eat whoever belongs to Ahab and dies in the city, and the birds of the air shall eat whoever dies out in the field. His family is coming to an end. None of them are going to be buried in the earth. They're all going to be consumed by animals, and ultimately they'll be fertilizer for the ground. That's God taking vengeance. Sometimes, we say, well, vengeance belongs to God, but I want my pound of flesh. You and I can in no way exact vengeance like God can. We think, I don't know that God will do a good enough job. I believe I can do a little bit better, and I want to do it myself. The fact of the matter is, there are times in the Bible, at least, where we see God taking vengeance against the actions of a people, and it kind of makes us feel sorry for them. Not necessarily Jezebel and Ahab, but their family. But, of course, the family, they're all wicked. If there had been a good child, like in the case of Baasha, they would have died and been buried in the earth. But that's the only one Baasha had, was the one. But the rest of them, that obviously are evil people as well. There was no one like Ahab, who sold himself to do wickedness in the sight of the Lord, because Jezebel, his wife, stirred him up. I don't know of a king in Israel meaner than him. This guy was mean to the nth degree. It's almost as though he absolutely despised Jehovah. During his reign and his father's reign, the reign of the two, the name of Jehovah almost became extinct in the northern kingdom. Worship of Jehovah almost didn't exist at all, and the little worship that was going on. There were priests and things that, they made their living that way, so they kept it afloat. But it wasn't real. It wasn't genuine. The nation, for all practical purposes, had expelled God from their borders. And God is trying to get the nation to come back. That's one thing you want to keep in mind. Throughout all of this, God is calling the people to repentance. Time and again, he's calling them to repentance. He did good to Ahab, remember? He gave Ahab a victory over outside forces who said that God was the God of the hills, their God was the God of the valley, remember? And God gave Ahab an incredible victory. He's trying to bless Israel, do something good for them. He's calling them back, but they don't come back. He calls for 200 years, but they don't come back. And then finally, he gives up on them. But that's one thing you want to keep in mind, that while these individual actions are occurring, as far as the nation is concerned, Jehovah loves the world. That's what John 3:16 tells us. And he's trying to save them. Ahab behaved very abominably in following idols, according to all that the Amorites had done, whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. You remember long ago when God spoke to Abraham that he was going to give the land of Palestine to his descendants. But he said their iniquity, their cup of iniquity wasn't full yet. There was no justification for taking the land from them at that point. But 400 years down the road, there will be justification. And one of the reasons was the people of Palestine were worshiping these idols throughout the land. And therefore Jehovah permitted Israel to go in and basically annihilate the people that lived there and take over their houses, their grocery stores, their factories, and whatever. Well, what we're being told now is that Israel, under the control of God's people, is back to the same state. In other words, it's pretty much like it was at the time when Joshua led the Israelites in to conquer the people of Canaan. What God did with the Canaanites, God must do with Israel if Israel is guilty of the same sins. And the reason is God is no respecter of persons. If he punished the Canaanites for those sins, he's obliged by his own nature to punish the Israelites if they're guilty of the very same sins. Otherwise, that wouldn't be fair. If you had two children and you told them not to steal a cookie when they both do, and you spank one and you left the other one off the hook, that's not being fair. Justice demands that both get spanked because that's what you promised. And if you're going to spank the one, you need to spank the other. Otherwise, you're going to have a child that really doesn't like you very much because you play favorites. Well, that's the way God is. He's not going to play favorites. What he did, he will do. He has no choice. This is the nature of God, being a just being. Ahab repents. After being told everything that's going to happen to him, he actually repents, believe it or not. So it was when Ahab heard those words, he tore his clothes, he put sackcloth on his body, he fasted and he lay in sackcloth, and he went about mourning. Of course, the people are going to witness the penitence of the king. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, "See how Ahab has humbled himself before me." Was it true penitence? Yeah. God is saying it was true penitence. This man was truly sorry. See how he's humbled himself? Now, because he has humbled himself before me, I'm not going to bring the calamity in his days, the calamity of the extinction of his family. In the days of his son, I will bring the calamity on his house. Because of the penitence that Ahab demonstrated, the Lord postponed the elimination of Ahab's family until the next child became king. So he repented, and he was noticed for it. A vile man, one of the most evil men of all. And God noted his penitent spirit. Now, of course, he's going to get evil again. But for this moment in his life when the sun broke through, God credits him for that and postpones the extinction of his family. One of the hardest things I think a man would have to watch is the elimination of his entire family. Of all things I could possibly think of, that would be the worst thing I would ever witness, would be the elimination of my family. To extend it from me to Chris, for me would be a great blessing. Of course, not for Chris, but for me it would be a great blessing. Him and Amanda, they would have to suffer watching the death of their children, their grandchildren, whatever. But that's kind of what's taking place here. Well, 3 years go by. Ahab, he's back to his former self again. The true Ahab is alive and well. He said to Jehoshaphat, who is the king of Judah, "Will you go with me to fight at Ramoth Gilead?" Jehoshaphat of Judah is a good king. He really is. Like his daddy, Asa, he tries to bring about religious revival in Judah, and they do a very good job. By the end of Jehoshaphat's administration, the people of Judah are very devout in worshiping God. And a lot of this is due to the work of his daddy Asa and now Jehoshaphat. But Jehoshaphat had a weakness, okay? He had a weakness. He wanted to create a kinder and gentler environment. From a political point of view, he wanted to be friends with everybody. He would bend over and kiss everybody's feet, thinking that if he was kind to them, they would return kindness to him. Well, in the political sphere, that doesn't really work. In the religious sphere, that doesn't really work. Look at the nations around the globe that the United States pours money into, because we want to kiss everybody's feet and we want everybody to like us. And truth be told, most of the nations we pour billions of dollars into, they really despise us. We've gained nothing through our efforts to render support to them. And in some cases, we've even formed leagues with peoples that we really shouldn't be forming leagues with, like China. China, for example, uses child slave labor. There's no way we should be cohabitating with China. Everybody knows it. There's companies over there. The place I work for, they own companies over there. And they use child labor. The children, they live right there in the factory. They got cots off in the corner of a wall, and they eat whatever little the company gives them. They're slaves for all practical purposes, and U.S. companies are using those children to produce product that comes to the United States. Much of the product says made in China. That's slave labor is behind it. Well, and a lot of U.S. companies do it. Don't kid yourself. But the United States policy was to befriend China in the sake of creating universal peace. Well, it's probably for the sake of creating universal money. But anyway, the bottom line is we formed a league with a nation that we should not have formed a league with. Now, who says so? God. God says so. God has got rules that you have to live by. We think of these rules as being rules for individuals, but they're not just for individuals. The rules of the Scriptures, Jesus Christ said, "I rule the earth." Isn't that true? I rule the earth. What does that mean? That means he is the king of everybody, every single person. And someone say, "Well, I thought he was only the king over Christians." No, he's the king over everybody. The difference is some people acknowledge him as king, and most people do not. Well, just because people do not acknowledge him as king, that doesn't mean they're not still under his lordship, because they are. In other words, they're amenable to the laws of the New Testament. But it doesn't only stop with individual people. Families are in subjection to the rules, the structure of New Testament Christianity. Governments are under that rule. What does Paul tell us in Romans chapter 13? Or 12? 13, okay. I doubted myself for just a moment there, Polly. In Romans 13, Paul tells us that government is a minister of God. In other words, government works for God, and government is supposed to act in accordance with the laws of God, which, when you run with the devil, you are guilty by association, right? That's what Paul or John teaches us in 1 John, 2 John chapter 1, verses 9 through 11, that you're guilty by association. Therefore, you're not supposed to get in league with those kind of peoples. But, as we know, governments don't listen to God. They do their own thing. Anyway, that's Jehoshaphat. That's him. That's the kind of a man he was. He was a good man, real good man. But he was a spineless man, because he thought that by making league with different nations, he was going to create a kinder and gentler environment. And of course, he was wrong. It doesn't work that way. It's a nice thought. You know, it happens out in La La Land somewhere. But in the real world, it just doesn't work that way. And that's the fault of Jehoshaphat. It's about the only one I can think of right off the top of my head. But it's a major fault. And I'll show you that as we go through. Ahab, who Jehoshaphat should have nothing to do with, he's the evil guy. Don't lock heads. Do not have association with the evil guy. Ahab wants Jehoshaphat to go to war with him, take Ramoth Gilead. And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as you are. My people is your people. My horses is your horses. That was a big no-no right there. We can't get in league with the denomination because we're told to stay away with those who teach a different doctrine than we do. Well, the same thing is true right here. In Judah, they worship Jehovah. In Israel, they worship Molech, idols, various deities. They're not supposed to be association, but he does. He does. He's thinking that he can befriend Ahab and maybe unite brethren one more time. Also, Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, please inquire for the word of the Lord today. Ask God what he thinks about this venture. The king of Israel, Ahab, gathered the prophets together. There were about 400 men, and he said to them, shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to fight, or shall I refrain? Their response, go up, for the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king. These men were not prophets, remember? The nation does not serve Jehovah. These are not prophets. They're false prophets. They're hired by Ahab to tell him what he wants to hear. They're yes men. That's why he keeps them on the payroll. At any rate, they say, go, the battle belongs to you. Jehoshaphat, he's not completely fooled by Ahab. Is there not still a prophet of the Lord somewhere in this land that we may ask him also? Isn't there a 401st prophet? Ahab responds, there is still one, Micaiah, the son of Imlah, by whom we may inquire of the Lord. There's one more prophet out there. We could ask him, but I hate him. I hate this guy. Why is that? He does not prophesy good concerning me, just evil. The difference between Micaiah and the 400 prophets was Micaiah was a prophet of God. He told the truth. The rest of them, they were liars. They told the king what he wanted to hear. And he said, I hate this guy because he tells me the truth. And I hate the truth. Well, what does he tell you? He tells you you're going to lose the battle. He wants to win the battle. But he tells them the truth. God said you're going to lose the battle. So he doesn't like him. It's a great irony there. I guess it's always been that way. This is why people hated Jesus, wasn't it? Isn't that what he said? Because I speak the truth, they hate me. If he would have told them a lie, the people would have liked him. But because he told them the truth, and they did not like the truth, therefore they hated him and they murdered him. And before he died, he told his disciples, he said, what they're doing to me, they're going to do to you. People that hate the truth are going to hate the person who bears the truth. It's always been that way. And Ahab is a good example of that very thing. Micaiah told him they would be defeated. He told them the truth. That was the message he received from God. He did it in a lengthy way. I've abbreviated it. So the kings of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, they went up to Ramoth-Gilead to fight the battle. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, he was wondering, he had a doubt in his mind. What if Micaiah is right? What if we are going to lose the battle? So he got an idea. Jehoshaphat, I'll disguise myself as just a soldier, and I'll go into the battle. But you put on your kingly robes. He's probably saying, well, we don't want two kings out there, so I'll take the soldier part, and you take the king part. Ahab knew the Syrians despised him more than you could believe. And he knew that if Micaiah was right, this could be his last battle. So what he's trying to do is disguise himself. He's trying to hide. You got tens of thousands of soldiers coming at you in battle. How do you spot one lone man? Well, if he's got on his kingly garb, you look for that one, because that'll be the king. Jehoshaphat, you wear it, I won't. And Jehoshaphat agrees. Now the king of Syria, he commanded his 32 captains of his chariots, saying, you fight with no one small or great, but only with the king of Israel, only Ahab. Here's your job. You find him, and you kill him. That's the only thing you do. You don't have to fight anybody else. The army will take care of the rest of it. But I want my chariots going after him. And I want you to kill him with death. Well, it's going to be easy to spot him because he's dressed like a king. Oh, no. Jehoshaphat's dressed like a king. That's the problem. Now, a certain man, he drew back a bow at random. They started to kill Jehoshaphat. They realized who he was, and they turned. They're only supposed to focus on one guy, Ahab. They realized that the king was Jehoshaphat. They turned away, so they got no chance of finding Ahab. He's escaped. He slipped through their fingers. But a certain man, who was he? Just a certain guy. Just an archer among tens of thousands of archers. You can see all them archers lined up everywhere. A certain man out there, he just pulls back his bow. They shoot the bow into the air. They shoot him into a crowd, the arrow rather, hoping they'll hit someone. It's a shot in the dark, is what it is. So there's a certain man who just drew back his bow at random, aiming for no one in particular, and poof, he lets go of that string, and it just so happened he struck the king of Israel between the joints of his armor. The armor, of course, is made out of steel, and in order to have mobility, the arm piece and the breast piece has to be connected by a piece of leather. That way he can move his arm. So whenever the arrow hits the metal, it bounces off, and the guy's covered with metal. Even his face has got metal over it. And it just so happened, by coincidence, that some unknown soldier, he pulls back that arrow, he shoots it off into the sky. It comes down, it goes right between those two joints, and hits Ahab, and ultimately will kill him. Now we're looking at divine providence, what God can do. He told Ahab, the dog's going to lick your blood in the same place where they licked up the blood of Naboth. This is vengeance on you, Ahab, because of what you did to Naboth, my son. So now, the luckiest shot in the history of the world, or was it? I don't think so. And Ahab is hit. The battle increased that day, and they propped up their king in his chariot. He's got to stay in the battle as they fought the Syrians, and then he died that evening. The blood ran out of his wound down into the floor of the chariot. Chariots are really quite large. There's 3 people in that chariot. There's the king, the driver, then there's a guy there that protects the king. So it's a fairly large chariot. And the floor of it fills with the blood of Ahab. So the king died. He was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. They always have quick burials over in the Middle East. Then someone washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood while the harlots bathed, according to the word of the Lord which he had spoken. This was the place where he shed the blood of Ahab. They washed out his chariot, and the blood flowed on the same ground the blood of Naboth did. When God says something is going to happen, you can put it in the bank. It's going to happen. The impossible becomes a reality. What should have never happened, a 1 in 10 million shot, was the shot that ended the life of Ahab. When God says something's going to happen, you got to put it in the bank. Don't doubt him. It's going to happen. Don't doubt him. It'll happen. And it'll happen just like he said it'll happen. And these are all little proofs demonstrating that from the most incredible directions. Worship of Jehovah almost came to an end at Israel. I mentioned that a moment ago. The God who delivered Israel into the land of promise has now become virtually unknown by the current generation of people. For so it was, while Jezebel massacred the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them, 50 to a cave, and had fed them with bread and water. There was a contract out on prophets of God in Israel. What were they doing? They were trying to eliminate the prophets. Why? Because the prophets teach the truth, and they do not want to hear the truth because they hate the truth. So she's on a mission to eliminate the prophets, and therefore you eliminate any knowledge of God in the land of Israel. One of the things you want to do if you want to change a nation from one ideology to another, from one philosophy to another, you have got to remove that to which people are devoted. Nations have always done that, except for the Roman Empire. They approached it from a different angle and were much more successful. But what the ancients always did was when they took a land, if they did not acknowledge the God of that land, they would eliminate any knowledge of him. Now Jehovah's got to go because his rules are too stringent. For example, there can only be one God. And the ancients wanted hundreds and even thousands of God. Well, that's a negative for Jehovah because he wants to be the only God of all. His rules about morality, those were the rules that people always despise. Always keep your mind on that. The laws people hate is the moral code of Jehovah. And this is what they despised. The only way you can get rid of the things, the obstacles that are in your way, is to take Jehovah's name out of the picture. You've got to destroy knowledge of him. For example, in the schools, they used to have prayer when they went to school. They would go to the little synagogue, which usually served also as a school. And it got to the point where they weren't allowed to say prayer in the school anymore. Because every time they did, the children are being reminded of God that they're praying to. They studied the scriptures in school. Well, they had to stop that. You can't bring the scriptures to school anymore. Why? Because we're wanting to rid the nation of this Jehovah God. So what are you going to do? You got to make sure children don't know who he is. You can't start with the old people because they already know who he is. You got to start with the children. These are the ones that are learning. These are the ones that are on a learning curve. So what you do is whatever you have to do to eliminate any source of knowledge that ultimately comes to children. They took prayer out of school. They took their Bible out of school. Nothing changes.
John, last night at Livingston, they had prayer before the game. They prayed in Christ's name. And they had to mention names, but really surprising.
Well, one thing in our area, you'll have two people that'll complain and nobody really cares, you know. But you get off in the populated areas and that won't happen. That's a no-no. Even presidents won't name Christ anymore. They talk about a God, any God. You got to accept all the gods. You got to accept Muhammad. Can't talk about Jehovah. But that's always been the custom. That's what she's doing. Get him out. And she came real close to it too. She almost succeeded. Concerning Jezebel, the Lord also spoke, saying, the dog shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. That was fulfilled about 13 years later. For 13 years, she wielded a lot of power over Israel through her sons, who were also kings. This was one wicked woman. Of course, her living another 13 years, had God wanted to, he could have terminated her life when Ahab died. Isn't that true? Sure, he's God. If he wanted to, he could. But he let her live another 13 years. Why would he do that? She was meaner than Ahab. Why would he do that? Sometimes the God raises up good leaders to bless his people. And sometimes he raises up bad leaders to punish his people. It all depends on what his people need at the time. But he always acts in accordance with the behavior of people. She carried a big stick during the reign of Ahijah and Jehoram. She was, they catered to mommy all the time, and she was bad news. We might as well stop right here. Jehoshaphat. There's not a lot to say about Jehoshaphat. I wonder how much time we got left. I'll never get it done in 3 minutes. I feel sorry for Jehoshaphat. I know he was a good man, very good man, but he was not always listening to God when it came to how you're supposed to deal with an adversary. God, he always wanted his people to stay clear of anything that contradicts their faith, for fear that they might be persuaded to believe something that's not true. So there was always supposed to be a certain amount of distance. For example, it's okay for us to go and talk to others, trying to lead other people to become Christians, for example. But we have to be very careful that in the process, they don't persuade us to agree with them. That danger is always alive and present. you listen to what a person says from their point of view, and it can tug the strings of your heart. And because of that, if your faith isn't very strong, you could be persuaded to say, well, from their point of view, I see this, this, and this. The thing about the truth is that truth is always absolute. It never changes. It's absolute. And until a person is determined and accepts that as fact, there's always a viable danger that they may be convinced that there's another way equally good. And that's what Jehoshaphat was. He didn't listen to God like he should have. He made a league with Ahab. He made a league with some other nations that he really shouldn't have done. And what's going to happen after the death of Jehoshaphat? He and his father created an enormous religious revival in Judah. I mean, man, it was a great revival. But after Jehoshaphat died, his kids went the other way. They were torn between two philosophies that their father lived by. On the one hand, he trusted in God, and number two, he trusted in the philosophy of man, of how you go about building a kinder and gentler nation. Well, his sons didn't go with Jehovah. They went the other way. And in a very short period of time, they undid everything he and his father had built. And that was a real shame. And it was because of Jehoshaphat. He was the cause of it. Yeah, Bert.